The sound of tearing fabric cut through the prairie wind like a gunshot, and Julia Jameson felt her heart sink as she looked down at the long, jagged rip running up the side of her only dress. She had been climbing down from the covered wagon at dusk, tired from another endless day of travel across the Utah Territory, when the worn calico caught on a rusty nail protruding from the wagon's wooden side. The fabric had given way instantly, splitting from her hip nearly to her shoulder, exposing her threadbare chemise beneath. Julia stood frozen in the fading light, her fingers clutching the torn edges together as heat flooded her cheeks. Around her, the wagon train had come to a halt for the night near Beaver, Utah, a small settlement that seemed to materialize from the red dust itself. The year was 1878, and she had been traveling for 3 months now from Missouri, fleeing a past she refused to let define her future. Everything she owned in this world was packed in the small trunk inside that wagon, and that trunk held exactly 2 chemises, 1 pair of boots with holes in the soles, and the dress that now hung in ruins from her shoulders. "Miss Jameson, you all right over there?" The voice came from behind her, deep and concerned, carrying the slight drawl of someone who had spent his entire life under open skies. Julia turned to see Cole Jackson approaching, his weathered hat shading eyes that seemed to catch every detail, even in the dimming light. He was the wagon train scout, a man of maybe 26 years who spoke little but noticed everything. She had barely exchanged a dozen words with him in all their weeks of travel, though she had certainly noticed him. Most of the women had. He was tall and lean, with sun-darkened skin and hands that looked equally capable of handling a rifle or gentling a spooked horse. "I am fine, thank you," Julia said quickly, turning away so he would not see the full extent of the damage. But her voice cracked on the last word, betraying her. She was not fine. She was alone in the wilderness with nothing but this ruined dress, and tomorrow they would ride into Beaver proper, where she hoped to find work as a seamstress or perhaps a schoolteacher. How could she present herself to potential employers looking like a ragamuffin? Cole's boots crunched on the dry earth as he came closer. "That nail has been troubling me for days," he said. "I should have hammered it down. This is my fault." "It is not your fault," Julia said, still facing away from him. "I should have been more careful." A long silence stretched between them, filled only by the sounds of the camp coming to life around them. Fires were being lit, horses were being tended, and children were running between the wagons in that last burst of energy before exhaustion claimed them. Julia heard all of it as if from a great distance, her mind racing through impossible solutions to her predicament. "I have a sewing kit," Cole said finally, "and I can mend that for you if you would permit it." Julia turned then, surprise overriding her embarrassment. "You can sew." Something that might have been amusement flickered across his weathered face. "My mother insisted all her sons learn practical skills. Said a man who could not mend his own clothes would be at the mercy of every woman he met." He glanced toward the wagon train captain's fire, where several men were gathering. "I will be on watch tonight anyway, keeping an eye on things. You could turn in after supper and I would work on it by the fire while you sleep. Have it ready for you come morning." The offer was so unexpected, so quietly kind, that Julia felt tears prick at her eyes. She blinked them back furiously. She had learned not to cry during these long months on the trail, had learned to present a face of composed determination, no matter what hardships arose. But this simple gesture threatened to crack the armor she had so carefully constructed. "I could not ask you to do that," she said, though everything in her wanted to accept. "You did not ask. I offered." Cole adjusted his hat, a gesture she had noticed he made when uncomfortable with attention. "I am responsible for this wagon train's welfare, Miss Jameson, and that includes making sure one of our passengers is not left without proper clothing." Julia looked down at the torn fabric again, then back up at his face. His expression was serious, professional even, with nothing in it that suggested anything improper. They were, after all, surrounded by 30 other people. And he was right about one thing: she had no other options. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That would be very kind." He nodded once sharply. "After supper, then. You can drape it over the wagon side, and I will collect it once you are settled for the night." Cole turned and walked away before she could say anything more, his long strides carrying him toward the string of horses that needed tending. Julia watched him go, feeling a curious mixture of relief and something else she could not quite name. In 3 months of travel, she had kept herself apart from the other families, not wanting to invite questions about her past or her reasons for traveling alone. The wagon master had accepted her passage fee and asked nothing beyond her name. That was all she had wanted. But now Cole Jackson had seen her at her most vulnerable, and instead of looking away or making her feel ashamed, he had offered help. The simple decency of it made her chest tight. Supper that night was the usual trail fare: beans and salt pork, hardtack softened in coffee, and a few precious dried apples that one of the families shared around. Julia sat on the periphery of the main group, as she always did, eating mechanically while her mind churned. She had worn her shawl over the torn dress, pinning it carefully to hide the worst of the damage, but she was acutely aware of how precarious her situation was. One strong wind, one careless movement, and the dress would fall apart entirely. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the Utah sky in shades of orange and purple, Julia made her way back to her wagon. She had been sharing it with the Miller family for the last month, after the original family she traveled with had split off toward California. Mrs. Miller was a gaunt woman with tired eyes and 4 small children who seemed to produce endless noise. Mr. Miller drove the wagon and spoke rarely, his face set in lines of perpetual worry. "You turning in already?" Mrs. Miller asked as Julia climbed into the back of the wagon. The younger children were already rolled in their blankets, and the older 2 were helping their father secure the livestock for the night. "I am very tired," Julia said, which was true enough. She was always tired these days. The journey had worn her down in ways she had not anticipated, leaving her feeling hollowed out and brittle. Mrs. Miller nodded absently, already focused on checking her youngest for ticks and burrs. Julia changed behind the privacy of a hanging blanket, slipping out of the torn dress and into her spare chemise and a thin cotton wrapper that had seen better days. She folded the dress carefully, examining the damage in the lamplight. The tear was even worse than she had thought. The nail had not just ripped through the fabric, but had caught and pulled several threads completely out, leaving a gap nearly 9 inches long. The calico was old, worn thin from countless washings, and the edges were already beginning to fray further. It would take considerable skill to mend it in a way that would hold. She wondered if Cole Jackson truly had that skill, or if he had simply been trying to comfort her with false hope. Either way, she appreciated the gesture. Julia draped the dress over the side of the wagon as he had instructed, letting it hang there like a flag of surrender. Inside the wagon, she lay down on her thin bedroll and pulled her single blanket up to her chin. The Miller children's breathing gradually evened out into sleep, and Mrs. Miller settled beside her husband at the far end of the wagon. Julia closed her eyes, certain she would lie awake all night worrying. Instead, exhaustion pulled her down into darkness almost immediately. She woke once, briefly, to the sound of movement outside the wagon. Through the canvas covering, she could see the orange glow of the fire, still burning strong. A shadow moved across it, tall and steady. Cole keeping his watch. She listened for a moment to the night sounds, horses shifting and blowing, the distant call of a coyote, the crackle of burning wood. Then sleep claimed her again. When Julia woke properly, dawn was just beginning to gray the eastern horizon. She lay still for a moment, orienting herself, before remembering the dress. She sat up carefully, trying not to disturb the still sleeping Miller family, and peered over the side of the wagon. The dress was there, neatly folded and placed on the wagon seat where she would find it easily. Her heart hammering with a mixture of hope and dread, Julia reached out and took it, pulling it back inside the wagon. She unfolded it slowly, holding her breath. In the growing light, she could see the mended tear running up the side. But calling it simply mended did not do justice to what Cole had done. The stitches were tiny and precise, running in a careful line that pulled the torn edges together almost invisibly. He had even reinforced the area around the nail hole, adding a patch of fabric from somewhere that matched her calico almost perfectly. The work was so neat, so professional, that Julia had to run her fingers over it to believe it was real. He had spent hours on this. Hours of his night, when he should have been resting or at least relaxing by the fire, bent over her dress with needle and thread, making stitches so small her own mother would have approved. Julia pressed the fabric to her face, overwhelmed by a rush of emotion she did not know how to name. No one had done something like this for her in so long. Since her mother died 3 years ago, since her father followed 6 months later, since her brother's wife made it clear that Julia was an unwelcome burden in their household. She had become accustomed to managing alone, to expecting nothing from anyone. This unexpected kindness cracked something open inside her chest. She dressed quickly behind the privacy blanket, slipping into the mended dress. It fit perfectly, and the repair was so well done that she would have to point it out for anyone to notice it. Julia smoothed her hands down the skirt, feeling the tears trying to rise again. Outside, the camp was beginning to stir. She could hear Mr. Miller talking to his oxen as he prepared them for the day's journey. Fires were being rekindled, coffee was being boiled, and children were emerging from wagons with sleep-tousled hair and querulous voices. Julia climbed down from the wagon carefully, avoiding the treacherous nail, and looked around for Cole. She spotted him near the horse string, checking hooves and distributing grain. He was moving with the efficient economy of motion she had noticed before, wasting neither time nor energy. She walked toward him, her heart beating faster with each step. What did you say to someone who had done something so kind, so personal for a near stranger? Thank you seemed inadequate. Cole looked up as she approached, his eyes going to her dress for just a moment before returning to her face. It held together all right. It is perfect, Julia said, and her voice came out softer than she intended. Mr. Jackson, I do not know how to thank you. The work you did is extraordinary, he shrugged, looking uncomfortable with the praise. It is just sewing. Any cowboy worth his salt can manage it. That is not just sewing, and you know it. Julia took a step closer, wanting him to understand how much this meant to her. You must have worked on it for hours. I was awake anyway. He finished checking the last horse and straightened, finally meeting her eyes directly. In the morning light, she could see that his eyes were a warm brown, almost amber, with fine lines at the corners from years of squinting into the sun. Besides, I told you it was my fault. That nail should have been dealt with days ago. It was not your fault, and we both know it. Julia held his gaze, refusing to let him minimize what he had done. You did something very kind for me, Mr. Jackson, and I want you to know that I will not forget it. Something shifted in his expression then, a softening around his eyes that made him look younger, less weathered. Cole, he said. "You can call me Cole. We have been traveling together for 3 months now. Seems like formality is a bit silly at this point." "Julia," she offered in return, a smile tugging at her lips despite herself. "Though you knew that already, I did." He returned the smile, just a slight quirk at the corner of his mouth, but it transformed his whole face. "But it is good to make it official." They stood there for a moment, something unspoken passing between them, before the wagon master's voice rang out across the camp, calling everyone to prepare for departure. The moment broke, and Cole touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that was becoming familiar. "We will be in Beaver proper by midday," he said. "You are planning to stay there," Julia nodded. "I hope to find work. I was trained as a seamstress, and I can teach reading and arithmetic if needed." "They could use both in Beaver," Cole said. Something in his voice made her look at him more closely, but his expression had gone professionally neutral again. "It is a growing settlement, Mormons mostly, but they welcome anyone willing to work hard and contribute." "That is all I want," Julia said quietly. "A chance to make an honest living and build a life for myself." Cole nodded slowly, his eyes searching her face as if memorizing it. "Then I hope you find what you are looking for, Julia Jameson." He walked away before she could respond, heading to confer with the wagon master about the day's route. Julia watched him go, feeling off balance in a way that had nothing to do with the early hour or her empty stomach. Something had shifted between them in the night, in that act of quiet service while she slept. She felt seen in a way she had not been in years, and the feeling was both terrifying and exhilarating. The wagon train began its final push toward Beaver with the full morning sun. Julia sat on the wagon seat beside Mr. Miller, who had grudgingly agreed to let her ride up front for this last leg of the journey. From this vantage point, she could see Cole riding ahead on his bay gelding, scouting the terrain and occasionally circling back to report to the wagon master. He was magnificent to watch, she had to admit. He sat his horse like he had been born in the saddle, moving with the animal rather than against it. He wore the standard cowboy's attire: canvas pants, a worn cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, a leather vest, and that battered hat that seemed to be part of his body. A gun belt rode low on his hips, and a rifle was secured to his saddle, but Julia had never seen him draw either weapon in anger during their entire journey. "He is a good man," Mr. Miller said suddenly, startling Julia from her observations. The dour farmer rarely spoke unless directly addressed, so his volunteering of information was unexpected. "Who?" Julia asked, though she knew perfectly well who he meant. "Jackson, the scout." Mr. Miller kept his eyes on his oxen as he spoke. "Heard what he did for you last night. Helped my wife fix our wagon wheel 2 weeks back and did not ask for a cent. There are not many like him left in this world." Julia felt her cheeks warm. "He was very kind and sweet on you besides," Mr. Miller continued, still not looking at her. "Though I reckon you noticed that already." "I think you are mistaken," Julia said quickly, her heart starting to pound. "He was simply being helpful." Mr. Miller made a sound that might have been a laugh or a grunt. "I have been married 15 years, Miss Jameson. I know what a man looks like when he is interested in a woman. That boy has been watching you since you joined our train, and last night he spent 4 hours sewing your dress when he should have been sleeping. That is not just being helpful, that is courting." Julia did not know what to say to that. The idea that Cole Jackson might be interested in her romantically had not seriously occurred to her. She had assumed his help was born purely from a sense of duty and perhaps pity for her situation. The thought that it might mean something more made her pulse race in a way that was not entirely comfortable. "I am leaving the train today," she said, more to herself than to Mr. Miller. "So it does not matter either way, does not it?" Mr. Miller finally glanced at her, his weathered face thoughtful. Jackson lives in Beaver. That is his home base. Why do you think he always scouts this route? Julia stared at him, then looked ahead to where Cole was riding. As if sensing her gaze, he turned in his saddle and looked back at the wagon train. Their eyes met across the distance, and even from here she could see the intensity in his expression. Her stomach did a curious flip. "I did not know that," she said quietly. "Well, now you do." Mr. Miller returned his attention to the oxen. "What you do with that information is your business." They rode in silence after that, Julia's mind churning with this new information. She had been so focused on surviving the journey, on reaching her destination and starting over, that she had not allowed herself to think about anything else. Romance, love, partnership, those were luxuries for people with stable lives and certain futures. She was 22 years old and starting over with nothing but a torn dress and a handful of skills. But Cole Jackson had spent hours sewing that dress by firelight. He had noticed her, had cared enough about her comfort and dignity to sacrifice his own rest. And according to Mr. Miller, he lived in Beaver, which meant this was not a trail-side kindness that would be forgotten as soon as the wagon train dispersed. What did that mean? What did she want it to mean? Beaver came into view just before noon. A collection of low buildings sprawled across the red earth like stones cast by a giant hand. The settlement had a determined look to it, the kind of place built by people who had decided to make something from nothing through sheer force of will. Julia could see a church steeple rising above the other buildings, several corrals full of livestock, and what looked like a main street lined with businesses. Her new home, if she could make a place for herself here. The wagon train pulled into town with a ragged cheer from the travelers. They had been on the trail for months, and the sight of civilization, even this rough frontier version of it, was cause for celebration. People began climbing down from wagons before they even fully stopped, stretching trail-stiff limbs and exclaiming over the town's features. Julia remained on the wagon seat, suddenly paralyzed with uncertainty. What now? She had spent so much time focused on reaching this point that she had not thought in concrete terms about what came after. Where would she sleep tonight? How would she find work? Should she approach the church first, or try the businesses along the main street, Miss Jameson? Cole's voice beside the wagon startled her. She looked down to find him standing next to the wheel, his hat in his hands. "May I help you down?" Julia nodded mutely and allowed him to grasp her waist, lifting her from the high seat as easily as if she weighed nothing. He set her on the ground gently, his hands lingering just a moment longer than strictly necessary before he stepped back. "Welcome to Beaver," he said, and there was something in his voice that made the simple words sound like a promise. "Thank you." Julia looked around at the bustling town, feeling overwhelmed. "It is larger than I expected. About 200 permanent residents now and more coming every month." Cole gestured toward the main street. "We have got a general store, a blacksmith, a doctor, 2 saloons, a boarding house, and the church. The schoolhouse is just beyond the main buildings. They are always looking for teachers if you are still interested in that line of work." "I am interested in any honest work," Julia said. "Though teaching would be wonderful if they would have me." Cole's expression grew serious. "They would be lucky to have you, but first, you need a place to stay. The boarding house is run by Mrs. Alina Chen. She is fair and honest, and her prices are reasonable. I could introduce you if you would like." "You have done so much for me already," Julia protested, but her voice lacked conviction. The truth was, she desperately wanted his help, his presence, his steady competence as she navigated this new beginning. "It would be my pleasure," Cole said simply. He offered his arm with old-fashioned courtesy. After a moment's hesitation, Julia took it. They walked down the main street together, and Julia was intensely aware of the looks they drew. In a town this small, everyone would know everyone else's business, and the arrival of a wagon train was major news. A strange woman walking arm in arm with the local scout would certainly be noteworthy. Let them look, Julia thought with a sudden flash of defiance. She had traveled across half the country to make a new life. She was not going to start it by hiding or apologizing for accepting kindness. The boarding house was a two-story structure built from adobe and timber, with a wide porch that looked welcoming despite its simplicity. Before they reached the steps, the front door opened and a small, energetic woman emerged. She appeared to be in her mid-40s, with black hair streaked with gray and sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. "Cole Jackson, is that you?" The woman's voice carried a faint accent that Julia could not place. "I heard the wagon train was coming in today. Who is this young lady, Mrs. Chen?" "This is Miss Julia Jameson. She is looking for lodging and possibly work." "Julia, this is Mrs. Eleanor Chen, who runs the finest boarding house in Beaver." "The only boarding house in Beaver," Mrs. Chen corrected with a smile. She looked Julia up and down in a swift, assessing way that somehow managed not to be insulting. "You are looking for work as what? We have more cowboys than we know what to do with already." "I was trained as a seamstress," Julia said, finding her voice. "And I can teach reading, writing, and basic arithmetic. I worked in my father's store before he passed, so I know bookkeeping as well." Mrs. Chen's eyes lit up. "A seamstress? Oh, honey, you just answered about 50 prayers. The nearest proper seamstress is in Cedar City, 30 miles south. Women in this town have been begging for someone who can do more than basic mending." She glanced at Cole with a knowing smile. "I see you have already found yourself a champion." Cole's ears reddened slightly, but he met Mrs. Chen's gaze steadily. "Miss Jameson is new to town and could use a friend. I am simply being neighborly." "Of course you are." Mrs. Chen's tone suggested she believed no such thing, but she was too kind to press the point. She turned back to Julia. "I have a room available. It is small, but it has a window and a good lock on the door. $3 a week, and that includes breakfast and supper. If you want to work as a seamstress, I will help spread the word. You will have more business than you can handle within a week, I guarantee it. $3 a week." Julia quickly calculated the money she had left after paying her passage on the wagon train. She had perhaps enough for 3 weeks, maybe 4 if she was very careful. After that, she would need to have established some source of income or she would be sleeping in the street. "I will take it," she said, hoping she sounded more confident than she felt. "Thank you, Mrs. Chen. Call me Eleanor. Everyone does." The older woman smiled warmly. "Do you have luggage?" "Just a small trunk on the wagon. Cole, be a dear and fetch it for her." It was not a question. Eleanor linked her arm through Julia's and began guiding her toward the boarding house. "Come inside, honey. You look like you could use a proper meal and a hot bath. When was the last time you had either?" "I honestly cannot remember," Julia admitted. Eleanor made a tusking sound. "That trail is no place for a young woman alone. You are very brave to have done it." "I did not have much choice," Julia said quietly. Eleanor squeezed her arm in understanding. "The best decisions are often the ones we have no choice about. Come on, let me show you your room. Cole can bring your trunk up when he gets back." The boarding house interior was clean and welcoming, with lace curtains at the windows and the smell of something savory cooking in the kitchen. Eleanor led Julia up a narrow staircase to a small room at the back of the house. It was indeed tiny, barely large enough for a narrow bed, a washstand, and a small trunk at the foot of the bed. But it had a window that looked out over the red hills beyond town, and the quilt on the bed looked clean and soft. "It is not much," Eleanor said. watching Julia's face carefully. "But it is yours, for as long as you need it." "It is perfect," Julia said, and meant it. This small, plain room represented safety and independence in a way that no palace could have. This was hers. She would earn her keep here, build a life here, become someone here. "I will send Cole up with your trunk when he arrives, and then I will heat water for a bath," Elinor said. "Take your time settling in. Supper is at 6. After Elinor left, Julia stood in the center of the small room and slowly turned in a circle, taking it all in. Afternoon sunlight streamed through the window, painting everything gold. Outside, she could hear the sounds of the town. Hammering from the blacksmith's forge, the lowing of cattle, voices calling to one another in greeting or in business. A knock at the door made her turn. "Come in." Cole entered carrying her trunk as if it weighed nothing, though Julia knew it was heavy with the few precious possessions she had managed to keep. He set it down gently at the foot of the bed and straightened, looking around the room with an expression she could not quite read. "It is a good room," he said finally. "Elinor keeps a respectable house. You will be safe here." "I know." Julia clasped her hands in front of her, suddenly nervous. They were alone in her room, which was not entirely proper, but she had something she needed to say to him. "Cole, I want to thank you again for everything you have done for me. The dress, the introduction to Elinor, all of it. You have been so kind to someone you barely know." "I would like to know you better," Cole said, and the directness of it took her breath away. "If you would permit it." Julia's heart hammered against her ribs. "I would like that too. May I call on you?" The formal phrasing contrasted with the intense way he was looking at her. "Properly, I mean. I could come by tomorrow evening and perhaps we could take a walk. I could show you more of the town." "I would like that very much," Julia said softly. Cole's face broke into a smile, the first truly unguarded one she had seen from him. It made him look boyish, and Julia felt something flutter in her chest that she had not felt in years. Hope, maybe, or the beginning of something deeper. "Tomorrow evening, then," Cole said. He moved toward the door, then paused and turned back. "Julia, I know you have been through difficult times. I do not know the details, and you do not have to tell me unless you want to. But I want you to know that whatever brought you here, whatever you are running from or running toward, you are safe now. This is a good town full of good people, and they will give you a fair chance. And I will do everything in my power to help you succeed here." The words were so heartfelt, so genuine, that Julia felt tears spring to her eyes again. Twice in 2 days this man had made her cry, but this time she did not try to hide it. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have no idea how much that means to me." Cole nodded once, then left quickly, as if he did not trust himself to stay longer without saying more than he should. Julia sank down onto the bed, her legs suddenly weak, and pressed her hands to her face. What was happening to her? She had promised herself that she would focus solely on survival and success when she reached Beaver. Romance was a complication she could not afford, a risk she was not prepared to take. And yet here was Cole Jackson, offering her not just help but genuine care, not just kindness but the possibility of something more. She touched the mended tear in her dress, tracing the tiny, perfect stitches with her fingertips. He had made these stitches by firelight while she slept, each one a small act of service and care. What kind of man did that for a near stranger, the kind of man worth taking a risk for, perhaps? Julia stood and began unpacking her trunk, trying to focus on practical matters. She hung her one dress carefully on the hook behind the door, arranged her few personal items on the washstand, and stacked her mother's books on the floor beside the bed. It took perhaps 10 minutes to unpack her entire life. Elinor knocked and entered with a train of helpers carrying a copper tub and buckets of steaming water. Within minutes, Julia had a hot bath waiting, a luxury she had not experienced in months. She stripped off her travel-stained clothes and sank into the water with a sigh of pure bliss. As she soaked, washing away the accumulated dust and grime of the trail, Julia let herself think about Cole Jackson. Really think about him, not just as a kind stranger but as a man who had expressed interest in courting her. What did she know about him? He was a scout and a cowboy, which meant he knew the land and could survive in it. He was skilled with his hands, both practical and gentle. He was quiet but observant, the kind of man who noticed when someone needed help and offered it without making a fuss. He was respected by people like Mr. Miller and Alina, which suggested he had a good reputation in town, and he made her feel safe in a way she had not felt since before her parents died. That alone was worth more than all the poetry or flowers in the world. Julia scrubbed her hair clean and rinsed it with fresh water Alina had left for the purpose. She dressed in her chemise and wrapper, then sat by the window to let her hair dry in the afternoon sun. Outside, the town continued its daily rhythm. She could see part of the main street from her window, watch people going about their business with the easy familiarity of long acquaintance. Could she find that here? That sense of belonging, of being part of something larger than herself. She had been adrift for so long, unmoored from everything familiar. Beaver was as good a place as any to drop anchor, better than most. And if Cole Jackson was part of the reason for that, well, she was not going to apologize for it. By the time 6 o'clock came, Julia had dressed in her mended calico and tidied her hair into a simple bun. She made her way downstairs to find the boarding house dining room full of people. There were perhaps a dozen boarders, mostly men but a few women as well, all gathered around a long table laden with food. Alina beckoned her over to an empty chair. "Everyone, this is Miss Julia Jameson. She just arrived on the Wagon train today and will be staying with us." "Julia, this is everyone. I will let them introduce themselves individually, or we will be here all night." The boarders greeted her with varying degrees of enthusiasm and curiosity. The man next to her introduced himself as Tom Hendricks, a clerk at the general store. Across the table was a school teacher named Martha Simmons, a sharp-eyed woman in her 30s who immediately peppered Julia with questions about her education and experience. "We desperately need another teacher," Martha said as Alina began serving stew from a large pot. "I have 43 students ranging from age 5 to 16, all in one room. It is absolute chaos. If you have any teaching experience at all, I can guarantee you a position." "I taught Sunday school back in Missouri," Julia offered. "And I helped my younger cousins with their lessons for several years." "That is more than enough." Martha leaned forward eagerly. "Can you start Monday? I will speak to the school board tomorrow, but they have been begging me to find help for months." "They will approve you on my recommendation alone." Julia's head spun. She had been in town for less than 4 hours and already had the prospect of employment. "I would be honored," she managed. "Excellent. The pay is not much, but it is steady. $40 a month, plus you can take your midday meal at the school. Parents provide lunch for the teachers as well as the students. $40 a month." Julia did the calculation quickly. After paying for her room, she would have more than enough to live on and even save a little. Financial security just like that. She wanted to laugh or cry or both. "I accept," she said, and Martha broke into a grin. "Thank God. You have just saved my sanity, Miss Jameson. Welcome to Beaver." The rest of the meal passed in a blur of conversation and information. Julia learned that Beaver had been settled primarily by Mormon pioneers about 20 years earlier, but had since become more diverse as miners, ranchers, and farmers moved into the area. The town was still rough around the edges but growing steadily. Water was scarce but carefully managed. Winters could be harsh, but summers were glorious. Conflict with the Ute people had largely ceased after a treaty several years back, though tensions still flared occasionally. By the time Julia made her way back upstairs to her room, her mind was so full of new information that she felt dizzy with it. She changed into her nightgown and crawled into bed, expecting to lie awake sorting through everything that had happened. Instead, she fell asleep almost instantly, lulled by the feeling of safety and the soft bed beneath her. She woke the next morning to brilliant sunlight and the sound of roosters crowing. For a moment, she was disoriented, forgetting where she was. Then memory rushed back and she sat up, looking around her small room with a sense of wonder. She was here. She had made it. Julia dressed quickly and made her way downstairs, where she found Alina and a few other boarders already at breakfast. The meal was simple but filling. Eggs, biscuits, bacon, and coffee that was actually hot and strong, not the weak trail version she had grown accustomed to. "Did you sleep well?" Alina asked, refilling Julia's coffee cup. "Better than I have in months," Julia admitted. "Thank you again for taking me in." "Oh, honey, you are going to earn your keep and then some. I heard Martha recruited you for the school already. That woman is a force of nature when she sets her mind to something." Alina smiled knowingly. "And I suspect you will have another visitor today." Cole Jackson has been pacing around town since dawn like a nervous cat. He is clearly working up the courage to come calling. Julia felt her cheeks warm. "He said he might stop by this evening." "Might. That is a good one," Alina chuckled. "Mark my words, he will be here. Probably with flowers if he can find any worth giving. That boy is smitten." "You barely know me," Julia protested. "How can you tell? I know Cole, and I have never seen him look at a woman the way he looks at you. Besides, I heard about the dress repair. A man does not spend half the night sewing unless he is seriously interested." Alina patted Julia's hand. "I think it is lovely. Cole is a good man who deserves a good woman, and you seem like you could use someone looking out for you." Julia wanted to argue, to insist that she did not need anyone looking out for her, that she was perfectly capable of managing on her own. But the words died in her throat because they were not entirely true. She had managed on her own for years now, but managing was not the same as thriving. And there was something deeply appealing about the idea of someone caring about her welfare again. After breakfast, Julia asked Alina if there was anything she could do to help around the boarding house. Alina immediately put her to work mending linens, which gave Julia a chance to demonstrate her sewing skills. By midday, Alina was planning how to advertise Julia's services as a seamstress to the other women in town. "The church social is tomorrow after services," Alina said. "That will be perfect. I will introduce you around, and once people see your work, you will have more commissions than you can handle." Julia spent the afternoon carefully mending sheets and pillowcases, her fingers moving automatically through familiar motions while her mind wandered. She kept thinking about Cole, about his visit tonight, about what it might mean. Was this too fast? She had only known him for 3 months, and they had barely spoken during that time. And yet, the connection she felt to him seemed to transcend the usual rules of courtship. He had seen her at her most vulnerable, when her only dress was torn and she had nothing. Instead of judging or pitying her, he had quietly fixed the problem and asked for nothing in return. That said more about his character than 100 formal calls could. As the afternoon shadows lengthened, Julia found herself growing increasingly nervous. She changed back into her calico dress, grateful again for Cole's expert repair work, and pinned her hair carefully. She had no ribbons or jewelry to adorn herself with, but she did her best to look presentable. At precisely 6 o'clock, there was a knock at the front door. Julia heard Alina answer it, heard the low rumble of Cole's voice, and then Alina was calling up the stairs. "Julia, dear, you have a visitor." Julia took a deep breath, smoothed her skirt one last time, and descended the stairs. Cole stood in the front hall, hat in hands, wearing clean clothes and an expression of barely concealed nervousness. When he saw her, his face lit up in a way that made her heart skip. "Good evening," he said. "You look lovely." "Thank you." Julia was suddenly shy, unsure how to act now that he was here for an official call. "Would you like to sit in the parlor? Actually, I was hoping we could take that walk I mentioned. The evening is pleasant, and I thought I could show you around town properly." Alina appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "That sounds delightful. You two go ahead. Julia, be back by 8, please. I keep respectable hours in this house." "Yes, madam," Julia and Cole said in unison, which made Alina smile. They stepped out into the warm evening air, and Cole offered his arm again. Julia took it, feeling the solid strength of him beneath the cotton of his sleeve. They walked slowly down the main street, Cole pointing out various businesses and landmarks. "That is the general store where Tom works," he said, indicating a building with a wide porch. "Mrs. Patterson runs it now that her husband passed. She is fair in her prices and will extend credit if you need it, though I reckon with your teaching position you would not have to worry about that." "It still seems unreal," Julia admitted. "Yesterday I was on a wagon train with no prospects, and today I have a job and a place to live." "Things can change quickly out here," Cole agreed, "for better or worse. I am glad your changes have been for the better." They walked past the blacksmith's forge, where a burly man was banking his fire for the night, and past the church with its modest steeple. Beyond the main buildings, the land opened up into grazing fields and scattered homesteads. The red earth seemed to glow in the evening light, and the sky was already starting to show the first hints of color. "It is beautiful here," Julia said softly. "Harsh, but beautiful." "That is a good way to describe it." Cole was quiet for a moment, then said, "Can I ask you something personal?" "You do not have to answer if you do not want to." Julia's stomach tightened, but she nodded. "All right. Why were you traveling alone? Most women come out here with family or as part of a marriage arrangement, but you are on your own and you seem determined to stay that way." Julia was silent for a long moment, trying to decide how much to tell him. She had kept her story to herself for so long, wrapped it up tight so it could not hurt her anymore. But Cole had been honest with her, had shown her kindness and care. He deserved honesty in return. "My parents both died within 6 months of each other 3 years ago," she said finally. "My father had a mercantile in Missouri, and when he died, it went to my older brother William. William and his wife Martha made it clear that I was welcome to stay with them only as long as I made myself useful. I worked in the store for no wages, did all the cooking and cleaning in their household, and cared for their 3 children while being reminded daily that I was a burden they were graciously bearing." Cole made a low, angry sound, but he did not interrupt. "Last winter, William announced that he had arranged a marriage for me, to a man named Horace Griggs, who was 53 years old, widowed twice, and looking for a young wife to bear him more sons. I had met him once. He smelled of tobacco and onions, and he looked at me like I was livestock he was considering purchasing." Julia's voice had gone flat, reciting facts rather than reliving emotions. "I told William I would not marry him. He told me that if I refused, I would have to leave his household. So I left." "Just like that?" Cole's voice was full of admiration. "Just like that. I had been saving small amounts of money whenever I could, hiding it away. It was not much, but it was enough to buy passage on a wagon train heading west. I packed my trunk in the middle of the night and left a note saying I had gone to stay with a friend. By the time they realized I had lied, I was already 3 days out. That took courage, Cole said quietly. It took desperation, Julia corrected. Courage would have been standing up to them years earlier. But I am trying to be brave now, trying to build something for myself. I will not be dependent on anyone again, Cole. I cannot. She realized as she said it that she was warning him, drawing a line. If he was interested in her, he needed to understand that she would not give up her hard-won independence for anyone. But Cole surprised her. I would never ask you to be dependent on me, he said. One of the things I admire about you is your determination to stand on your own feet. But there is a difference between dependence and partnership, Julia, between being forced to rely on someone and choosing to build a life with them. Julia looked up at him, her heart pounding. We have only just met. I know, and I am not proposing marriage after one proper conversation. Cole stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression serious. But I want you to know my intentions are honorable, and my interest is genuine. I would like to court you properly, Julia Jameson. I would like to know everything about you, what makes you laugh, what frightens you, what you dream about. I want to earn your trust and your affection if you will give me the chance. Why? The question burst out of her before she could stop it. You could have any woman in this town. Why would you want someone with nothing, someone who comes with complications? Because you are brave and strong and you do not give up even when things are hard. Because you have a kindness in you despite everything you have been through. Because when I saw you standing by that wagon with your dress torn, trying so hard not to cry, I wanted nothing more than to fix things for you. And when I was sitting by the fire last night, making those stitches, I realized that I would be content to spend the rest of my life finding ways to make you smile. Cole's voice was steady, matter of fact, as if he was reporting the weather rather than laying his heart bare. That is why. Julia felt tears start to slide down her cheeks, and she did not try to stop them this time. I do not know how to do this, she whispered. I have never been courted before. William and Martha saw to that. They kept me too busy to have any kind of social life. Then we will figure it out together. Cole reached up gently and wiped the tears from her cheeks with his thumbs. His hands were calloused and rough from work, but his touch was infinitely careful. No pressure, no expectations. We will just spend time together and see where it leads. How does that sound? Terrifying, Julia admitted, but she was smiling through her tears. And wonderful. Cole's answering smile was like sunrise. Good, that is settled then. Now, should I tell you about the time I had to rescue the mayor's cat from a barn roof? Or would you prefer to hear about when I accidentally joined a cattle drive heading in the wrong direction? Julia laughed, the sound surprising her with its lightness. Both, I think. I want to hear everything. They continued walking as the sun set in glorious shades of orange and pink, and Cole told her stories that made her laugh and gasp in turn. He had grown up in Colorado, he explained, on a small ranch with 4 brothers and 2 sisters. His mother had died when he was 16, and his father had followed a year later, leaving the siblings to raise each other and manage the ranch. Eventually, they had sold the property and gone their separate ways. Cole had tried mining for a while, then cowboying, and finally settled into work as a scout because he loved the freedom of the open range and the satisfaction of helping travelers reach their destinations safely. What about you? He asked. What did you love to do before everything fell apart? Julia thought back to the years before her parents died, when life had been simpler. I loved reading, she said. My mother had a collection of novels that she treasured, and she shared them with me. I would lose myself in stories for hours. And I loved sewing, creating something beautiful from scraps of fabric. My mother taught me, and she was so talented. She could look at a dress in a shop window and recreate it from memory. Julia smiled at the memory. I am not as good as she was, but I try. I saw your work, Cole said. Your stitches are clean and even. You have talent, Julia. Real talent. Between teaching and sewing, I think you are going to do very well here. They made their way back toward the boarding house as full darkness fell. The town's few street lamps cast pools of golden light, and from somewhere in the distance, Julia could hear someone playing a fiddle. The evening air had cooled pleasantly, carrying the scent of sage and dust. At the boarding house steps, Cole released her arm and stepped back, maintaining a respectable distance. Thank you for taking a walk with me, he said formally. May I call on you again? I would like that, Julia said. Very much. Tomorrow after church, then. I heard Alina mention that she is taking you to the social. You will be there. I will now. Cole's smile was visible even in the dim light. Good night, Julia. Good night, Cole. Julia watched him walk away into the darkness, then turned and made her way inside. Alina was in the parlor pretending to read a book, but she looked up with obvious curiosity as Julia entered. Well, she demanded. How did it go? It went well, Julia said, and she could not keep the smile off her face. Very well. I can see that. You are glowing, child. Alina set down her book and patted the sofa beside her. Come sit with me for a bit and tell me all about it. At my age, I have to live vicariously through young people's romances. Julia sat and found herself telling Alina everything: the walk, the conversation, Cole's declaration of his intentions. Alina listened with the focused attention of someone who genuinely cared, nodding and making small sounds of approval. He is a good man, Alina said when Julia finished. One of the best I have met in this town, and I have met quite a few in my time here. His word is his bond, and he treats everyone with respect. You could do far worse, Julia. I barely know him, Julia protested weakly. Sometimes you just know, Alina said with the wisdom of experience. I met my late husband on a Tuesday and married him the following Saturday. We had 32 wonderful years together before the fever took him. When you know, you know. Do not waste time talking yourself out of happiness just because it came faster than you expected. Julia thought about that as she made her way upstairs to her room. Was this happiness? This fluttery, nervous, excited feeling in her chest? She had been so focused on survival for so long that she had almost forgotten what happiness felt like. In her small room, she changed into her nightgown and sat by the window, looking out at the star-filled sky. Somewhere out there, Cole was probably going to his own home, thinking his own thoughts. Was he nervous too? Did he lie awake wondering if he had said too much or not enough? The thought made her smile. It was nice to think that she was not the only one feeling off balance. Sunday morning dawned clear and bright. Julia dressed carefully in her calico, wishing she had something finer for church services. But the fabric was clean and the stitches were invisible unless you knew where to look. It would have to do. Alina and several other boarders walked to the church together, a small parade of Sunday best clothing and carefully combed hair. The church was already filling up when they arrived, families settling into pews and greeting neighbors with cheerful voices. Julia felt conspicuous as Alina led her to a seat near the front, aware of curious eyes following her. Then she saw Cole standing near the back of the church, and he smiled at her with such warmth that everything else faded into background noise. He was wearing a clean shirt and what looked like his only coat, and his hair was slicked back with water. He looked impossibly handsome. The service was pleasant, a mixture of hymns and a sermon about perseverance that felt personally relevant to Julia's situation. Afterward, everyone gathered outside for the social, where tables had been set up laden with food brought by various families. This was clearly a major event in the town's social calendar, and Julia was immediately surrounded by curious women asking questions. Alina had not exaggerated about the need for a seamstress. Within an hour, Julia had been approached by at least a dozen women asking about her services. One woman needed a wedding dress for her daughter. Another wanted help altering her late sister's clothes to fit her. A rancher's wife asked if Julia could make new curtains for her entire house. Julia's head spun with the requests, but she carefully noted each one, promising to call on the women during the coming week to discuss details and prices. The teaching position might provide steady income, but seamstress work could add substantially to her savings. She was in the middle of discussing embroidery patterns with an older woman when a hand gently touched her elbow. She turned to find Cole beside her, holding 2 glasses of lemonade. "You looked like you could use a rescue," he said quietly, offering her one of the glasses. "More like a reprieve," Julia said, accepting the lemonade gratefully. "I have never been so popular in my life. It is a bit overwhelming." "You are exactly what this town needed," Cole said. "Everyone is excited to have you here, but that does not mean you should not take a breath occasionally." He guided her away from the crowd to a quieter spot beneath a large cottonwood tree. From here, they could watch the social continuing, children running and playing while adults talked and laughed. "This is nice," Julia said. "The whole town coming together like this. It happens most Sundays, weather permitting. We are a small community, so we rely on each other. These gatherings help keep everyone connected." Cole took a sip of his lemonade, his eyes scanning the crowd with the habitual wariness of someone used to watching for trouble. "It can feel a bit suffocating sometimes, though. Everyone knows everyone else's business." "I noticed," Julia said wryly. "I have been asked at least 5 times today if you and I are courting. What did you tell them?" "That you had called on me once and it was too early to say." Julia glanced at him from beneath her lashes. Was that the right answer? That was a perfect answer. Cole shifted his weight, and she noticed that he seemed nervous. "Though I hope after a few more calls the answer might change to yes." "Perhaps," Julia said, but she was smiling. They spent the rest of the afternoon together, sometimes talking and sometimes just sitting in comfortable silence while the social swirled around them. Julia met dozens of people whose names she knew she would never remember, but everyone was friendly and welcoming. Martha, the schoolteacher, introduced her to several of the school board members, who all approved of her hiring on the spot. The mayor, a jovial man named Thomas Bennett, shook her hand enthusiastically and said Beaver was lucky to have her. By the time the social began to break up, Julia felt more optimistic about her future than she had in years. She had a job, a place to live, and prospects for additional income. She had made friendly acquaintances who might become real friends given time. And she had Cole, who seemed content to simply stand beside her and make sure she always had something to drink and was not overwhelmed by too many people at once. As Alina gathered her group to walk back to the boarding house, Cole stopped Julia with a gentle hand on her arm. "May I come calling tomorrow evening?" he asked. "I know you are starting at the school, so you will probably be tired, but I would like to see you, even if only for a short while." "I would like that," Julia said, "very much." His smile was reward enough for agreeing, but he surprised her by lifting her hand to his lips and pressing a soft kiss to her knuckles. The gesture was old-fashioned and courtly, and it made Julia's heart race. "Until tomorrow, then," he said softly. Julia walked back to the boarding house in a daze, barely hearing Alina's cheerful commentary about the social. That night, lying in her bed, she found herself replaying every moment of the day, every word Cole had spoken, every look he had given her. She was falling in love. It was too fast, too sudden, too improbable. But it was happening anyway, and for the first time in years, Julia did not try to fight against the current of her emotions. She let herself feel the hope and the happiness and the dizzy anticipation of whatever came next. Monday morning arrived too quickly. Julia dressed carefully in her calico, pinned her hair in a neat bun, and made her way to the schoolhouse with Martha. The building was a simple wooden structure with rows of desks facing a blackboard and a pot-bellied stove in one corner. "Brace yourself," Martha said as they approached. "The children are excited about having a new teacher, which means they will be absolutely wild." Martha was not exaggerating. The moment they opened the door, children swarmed around them, shouting questions and trying to get Julia's attention. She saw faces of all ages, from tiny 5-year-olds to gangly teenagers who looked like they would rather be anywhere else. "Children, to your seats!" Martha's voice cut through the chaos with the authority of long practice. "Now, please. This is Miss Jameson, and you will treat her with respect and courtesy, just as you treat me." "Is that understood?" A chorus of yes. Miss Simmons answered her, and the children scrambled to their desks with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Julia spent that first day mostly observing, helping individual students with their lessons while Martha taught the main lessons to the group. It was exhausting work, but rewarding in a way that surprised her. The children were eager to learn, for the most part, and the older students helped the younger ones with touching patience. By the time school let out at 3 o'clock, Julia's feet ached and her voice was hoarse from reading aloud. But she felt a sense of accomplishment that had been missing from her life for years. This was meaningful work, important work. She was making a difference. She walked back to the boarding house to find Alina waiting with news. "You have 3 women coming by in the next hour to discuss sewing projects," Alina said. "I took the liberty of setting up the parlor for you to conduct business. I hope that is all right." "It is more than all right. Thank you, Alina." The afternoon passed in a blur of measurements and fabric discussions. Julia agreed to make a wedding dress, alter 6 dresses, and sew new curtains for the rancher's wife's parlor. The work would keep her busy every evening for weeks, but the combined payment would give her a significant financial cushion. She was just seeing the last client out when Cole arrived for his call, right at 6 o'clock as promised. He was still in his work clothes, dusty from a day riding the range, but he had clearly made an effort to clean up. "How was your first day?" he asked as they settled in the parlor under Alina's watchful eye. "Wonderful and terrifying in equal measure," Julia admitted. "The children are sweet, but there are so many of them. I do not know how Martha has been managing alone." "Martha is a force of nature," Cole said with a smile. "But I am glad she has help now. You looked happy when you were talking about it. Teaching suits you." They talked for an hour, Cole telling her about his day checking fence lines for a local rancher, and Julia describing the various personalities of her students. It was easy, comfortable conversation, the kind that made Julia feel like they had known each other for years rather than days. This became their pattern over the next 2 weeks. Cole would call on Julia several evenings a week, sometimes taking her for walks around town, sometimes just sitting in Alina's parlor and talking. On Sundays, they attended church together and spent the afternoon at whatever social gathering was happening that week. Julia settled into her new life with surprising ease. The teaching work challenged her in the best ways, and the children quickly became attached to their new teacher. She was patient and kind, but firm when necessary, and she had a gift for explaining difficult concepts in ways the students could understand. The sewing work kept her busy in the evenings, but she found it meditative rather than burdensome. There was something deeply satisfying about taking a piece of fabric and transforming it into something beautiful and useful. Word of her skills spread quickly, and soon she had more commissions than she could reasonably accept. But the best part of her new life was Cole. They grew closer with each passing day, and Julia found herself thinking about him constantly. The way he smiled when he saw her, the gentleness of his hands despite their calluses, the quiet competence with which he approached every task, the way he listened when she talked, really listened, as if every word she said mattered. One evening, about 3 weeks after Julia had arrived in Beaver, Cole took her for a walk beyond the town limits, out to where the red earth rose in dramatic formations against the sky. They climbed to the top of a low mesa and sat side by side, watching the sunset paint the world in impossible colors. "I have been thinking," Cole said, his voice carrying a note of nervousness that Julia had not heard before. "About us." Julia's heart began to pound. "Oh, I know it has not been very long, just a few weeks. But Julia, I have never felt this way about anyone before. You are the first thing I think about when I wake up and the last thing on my mind before I sleep. When I am not with you, I am counting the hours until I can see you again." He turned to face her, his expression serious and vulnerable. "I am in love with you. I know it is too soon to say it, but I cannot keep pretending otherwise." Julia felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were happy tears this time. "It is not too soon," she whispered, "because I love you too. I think I started falling for you that night when you sewed my dress. No one has ever done something so kind for me, so thoughtful. And every day since then, you have shown me more reasons to love you." Cole's face broke into a wide smile, and he reached out to cup her face in his hands. "May I kiss you?" "Yes," Julia breathed. He leaned in slowly, giving her plenty of time to change her mind, but she did not want to. When his lips met hers, it was soft and sweet and perfect. Julia had never been kissed before, but somehow it felt natural with Cole, like something they had been doing for years. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling like fools. "I want to marry you," Cole said. "Not right away. I know you need time and I want to court you properly. But eventually, when you are ready, I want to make you my wife." Julia's practical side, the part that had been so focused on independence and self-sufficiency, wanted to hesitate. But her heart knew the truth. Cole was not trying to take away her independence. He wanted to build a life with her, to be her partner in every sense of the word. "I want that too," she said. "Eventually. Eventually is good enough for me." Cole kissed her again, and Julia felt like her heart might burst with happiness. They sat on that mesa until the stars came out, talking about the future in broad, hopeful strokes. Cole told her about a piece of land he had been saving to buy, 50 acres with a good water source and room for horses and maybe some cattle. Julia told him about her dream of opening a proper dress shop someday, where women could come to have clothes made and altered. "We could do both," Cole said. "The land has space for a house and outbuildings. You could have a shop right there, and I could build a workshop for myself too. We could make it work." "We could," Julia agreed, and for the first time in years the future did not look like something to be endured but something to look forward to. They climbed down from the mesa as full darkness fell, and Cole walked Julia back to the boarding house. At the door, he kissed her goodnight one more time, then waited until she was safely inside before heading off into the night. Leaner was waiting in the parlor, pretending to read as usual. When Julia came in, glowing with happiness, the older woman smiled. "He told you he loves you, I take it." "How did you know?" Julia demanded, laughing. "Child, the whole town has been waiting for one of you to work up the courage to say it. The way that man looks at you is indecent, frankly. And you are just as bad, staring at him like he hung the moon." Alina closed her book and stood, coming over to give Julia a warm hug. "I am happy for you, honey. You deserve good things. Thank you, Julia whispered into Alina's shoulder, for everything. If you had not taken me in, none of this would have happened. Nonsense. You and Cole would have found each other regardless. Some things are just meant to be. Julia went to bed that night feeling like she was floating. She had come to Beaver with nothing but a torn dress and desperate hope, and in less than a month, she had found a home, a vocation, and love. It seemed too good to be true, and part of her worried that something would go wrong, that she would wake up and find it was all a dream. But days turned into weeks, and her happiness only grew. She and Cole continued their courtship, growing closer with each passing day. He introduced her to his friends, took her riding in the hills around Beaver, and taught her to handle a gun. Julia introduced him to the joys of reading, and they spent long evenings with her reading aloud while he worked on repairing tack or other small projects. They were building a life together, slowly and carefully, laying a foundation that would support them for years to come. 2 months after Julia arrived in Beaver, Cole took her back to the mesa where they had first confessed their love. This time he had packed a picnic supper and they sat watching the sunset while eating cold chicken and fresh bread. I bought the land, Cole said suddenly. Those 50 acres I told you about. The deed is signed and it is mine. Ours if you will have it. Julia's heart skipped a beat. Cole Jackson, is this a proposal? Not yet. I want to do that properly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. But I wanted you to know that I am serious about building a future with you, and I wanted to give you this. He opened the box to reveal a simple gold ring with a small but perfect diamond. It was not fancy or elaborate, but it was beautiful. Julia Jameson, will you marry me? Will you build a life with me on that land, raise children with me if we are blessed with them, and grow old beside me? I promise to love you and respect you and support your dreams for as long as I live. Julia was crying now, tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling too. Yes, she said. Yes, yes, yes. Cole slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her with a passion that left them both breathless. When? He asked when they finally pulled apart. When will you marry me? Soon, Julia said. I do not want a long engagement. Let's marry before winter comes. October then, Cole said. That gives us a month to prepare. Is that enough time? It is perfect. They announced their engagement the next day at church, and the whole town celebrated with them. Alina cried happy tears and immediately began planning the wedding. Martha offered to help Julia make her wedding dress. The boarding house residents threw a party in their honor. Julia had never felt so surrounded by love and goodwill. These people, who had been strangers just 2 months ago, had welcomed her into their community and their hearts. Beaver had become home in a way Missouri never had. The next month passed in a blur of wedding preparations. Julia spent every spare moment sewing her dress, a simple but elegant design in ivory silk that Alina helped her purchase from a traveling merchant. Cole worked on building a small cabin on their new land, enlisting help from friends and neighbors. The whole town seemed invested in seeing them established. October arrived with cooler temperatures and brilliant blue skies. The wedding was planned for the first Saturday of the month, and it seemed like everyone in Beaver intended to attend. The night before the wedding, Julia lay in her small room at the boarding house for the last time. Tomorrow she would be Julia Jackson, wife and partner and homesteader. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. There was a soft knock at her door, and Alina entered carrying a cup of tea. I thought you might be too excited to sleep, the older woman said, settling into the room's single chair. I know I was the night before my wedding. I am too happy to sleep, Julia admitted. I keep thinking something will go wrong, that this is all too perfect to be real. Life has taught you to expect disappointment, Alina said gently. But Julia, you deserve this happiness. You have worked hard, overcome obstacles, and built a good life here. Cole is a wonderful man, and you two are going to have a beautiful future together. I just wish my parents could be here to see it, Julia said softly. My mother would have loved Cole. I am sure she would have. And I am sure she is watching over you, proud of the strong, capable woman you have become. Alina sipped her tea. You know, I think of you as the daughter I never had. It has been an honor to watch you bloom here. Julia felt tears prick her eyes. You have been like a mother to me, Alina. I will never forget your kindness. They talked late into the night, and when Alina finally left, Julia did manage to sleep, secure in the knowledge that tomorrow would bring the beginning of her new life. The wedding day dawned clear and perfect. Julia dressed in her ivory silk with Alina's help, pinning her hair up and adding the simple veil that had belonged to Alina's mother. When she looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the elegant woman staring back. She looked happy, she realized. Truly, deeply happy. The ceremony took place in the church, with the whole town crowded into the pews. Martha stood up as Julia's attendant, and one of Cole's cowboy friends served as his best man. The minister, a kind-faced man named Reverend Harris, spoke about partnership and commitment and the sacred bond of marriage, but Julia heard very little of it. She was too focused on Cole, standing beside her in a new suit that fit his rangy frame perfectly. He looked at her like she was the only person in the world, and when the time came to say their vows, his voice was steady and sure. I, Cole Thomas Jackson, take you, Julia Rose Jameson, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you, honor you, cherish you, and protect you for all the days of my life. In sickness and in health, in prosperity and hardship, I will stand beside you. This I swear before God and these witnesses. Julia's own vows were equally heartfelt. I, Julia Rose Jameson, take you, Cole Thomas Jackson, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you, honor you, cherish you, and support you for all the days of my life. I will build a home with you, raise a family with you if we are blessed, and grow old beside you. This I swear before God and these witnesses. Reverend Harris pronounced them husband and wife, and Cole kissed her to thunderous applause from the congregation. Julia felt like she was floating as they walked back down the aisle together, hand in hand, to begin their life as a married couple. The reception was held in the churchyard, with tables of food and a small band providing music for dancing. Julia and Cole had their first dance as husband and wife to a simple waltz, and Julia rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Happy. He murmured into her hair. Deliriously, she answered. They danced and ate and celebrated with their friends until sunset, when Cole finally loaded Julia into a wagon and drove her out to their new home. The cabin was small but well built, with a stone fireplace, a loft bedroom, and windows that let in plenty of light. Cole had furnished it simply but comfortably, with a bed, a table and chairs, and a chest for their belongings. "Welcome home, Mrs. Jackson," he said, lifting her over the threshold. Julia looked around their cabin, seeing not what it was but what it would become. They would build a life here, fill this space with love and laughter and, God willing, children. They would face hardships and celebrate triumphs. They would grow old together under this roof. "It is perfect," she said, and meant it with all her heart. That night, as they lay in their marriage bed with the fire crackling in the hearth, Julia thought about the journey that had brought her here. The wagon nail that had torn her dress seemed like a lifetime ago, though it had been only 3 months. She had been so alone then, so frightened and uncertain. Cole had seen her at her lowest and offered help without judgment or expectation. He had sewn her dress by firelight while she slept, each stitch an act of care, and in doing so he had mended more than just fabric. He had begun to mend her heart. "What are you thinking about?" Cole asked, his fingers tracing gentle patterns on her arm. "That torn dress," Julia said. "And how strange it is that something so disastrous led to something so wonderful." "God works in mysterious ways," Cole said with a smile. "Though I am grateful for that nail, despite the trouble it caused. If your dress had not torn, I might never have worked up the courage to talk to you." "Really? You seemed so confident." "I was terrified," Cole admitted. "You were so beautiful and so obviously out of my league. I figured you would find someone educated and refined, someone who could offer you more than a dusty cowboy with dirt under his fingernails." Julia turned to face him, cupping his weathered face in her hands. "You offered me everything I needed. Kindness, respect, love, and partnership. You see me as I truly am and love me anyway. What more could I possibly want?" Cole kissed her deeply, and Julia lost herself in the warmth of his embrace. This was home. Not the cabin, not the town, but this man and the life they would build together. The months after their wedding were full of hard work and simple joys. They spent the winter finishing the cabin, adding a workroom for Julia's sewing and a barn for Cole's horses. Julia continued teaching 3 days a week and took sewing commissions on her other days. Cole worked as a scout and hired himself out for ranch work, building their savings carefully. They were not rich, but they had enough. More importantly, they had each other. In the spring, Julia discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them both with joy and terror in equal measure. They were going to be parents, responsible for a tiny life. It seemed impossible and wonderful all at once. Julia continued teaching until she began showing noticeably, then reluctantly turned her classes over to Martha, and a new teacher the town had hired. She focused on sewing work she could do from home, taking commissions for baby clothes and household linens. Cole became even more protective and attentive, constantly worrying about her health and comfort. Julia found it endearing even when it was occasionally frustrating. Their son was born in early December, arriving on a cold night with a leaner and the town doctor in attendance. The labor was long and difficult, but when Julia finally held her baby boy in her arms, she knew every moment of pain had been worth it. They named him Thomas after Cole's father, and he had his father's amber eyes and his mother's dark hair. Cole held his son with infinite gentleness, tears streaming down his weathered face as he counted tiny fingers and toes. "He is perfect," Cole whispered. "You are amazing, Julia." "I love you so much." "I love you too," Julia said, exhausted but happier than she had ever been. "We made this beautiful thing together." They settled into their new roles as parents with the same determination they brought to everything else. The nights were hard, full of crying and interrupted sleep, but the days were full of wonder as they watched their son grow and change. Eleanor visited often, bringing food and advice and an extra pair of hands when Julia needed to rest. Martha came by with books and news from town. The whole community rallied around them as they did for all new families in their midst. When Thomas was 6 months old, Julia discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the news was less of a shock, though no less joyful. Their family was growing, their lives expanding in ways they had never imagined. Their daughter was born the following spring, an easy birth compared to Thomas. They named her Rose after Julia's mother, and she was tiny and perfect with lungs that could wake the dead when she wanted attention. Cole looked at his wife and 2 children with undisguised awe. "How did I get so lucky?" he asked. "We both got lucky," Julia corrected. "We found each other when we both needed finding." Over the years that followed, their family continued to grow. They had 2 more children, another son and another daughter, filling their expanded house with noise and laughter and love. Julia's sewing business thrived, and she eventually opened a small shop in town, just as she had dreamed. Cole purchased more land and built up a modest horse ranch, training animals for sale to ranchers and the army. They were not wealthy by any measure, but they were comfortable and content. More importantly, they were deeply in love, their bond growing stronger with each passing year. On their 10th anniversary, Cole took Julia back to the mesa where he had proposed. They sat watching the sunset just as they had done so many times before, but now their hands were roughened by work and marked with the signs of age. Julia's hair had threads of silver, and Cole's face was more weathered than ever. But when he looked at her, his eyes held the same love and wonder they had on that first night by the wagon train. "You ever regret it?" Julia asked. "Taking a chance on a woman with nothing but a torn dress?" "Never," Cole said firmly. "That torn dress was the best thing that ever happened to me. It gave me the excuse to talk to you to show you how I felt. And you gave me everything I never knew I needed. A home, a family, a purpose beyond just surviving." "You gave me the same," Julia said softly. "I was so lost when I came here, so certain I would always be alone. And then you sewed my dress by firelight, and everything changed." Cole pulled her close, and they sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned brilliant shades of orange and pink. They had built a beautiful life together, full of love and laughter and occasional hardship. They had raised children who were growing into good, kind people. They had created a home that welcomed friends and strangers alike. It was everything Julia had dreamed of and more. As they made their way back to their ranch as darkness fell, Julia thought about the scared young woman who had climbed down from that wagon with a torn dress and no prospects. She would never have believed that such disaster could lead to such happiness. But life, she had learned, was full of unexpected turns. A rusty nail and a skilled hand with needle and thread had changed everything. Cole had seen her at her most vulnerable and offered help. In doing so, he had opened a door to a future neither of them could have imagined. They had walked through that door together, hand in hand, and built something beautiful on the other side. Years continued to pass, each one adding new layers to their story. Thomas grew tall and strong like his father, with a gift for working with horses. Rose inherited her mother's skill with needle and thread, and her grandmother's love of reading. Their younger children each found their own paths, and Cole and Julia watched with pride as their family expanded to include sons-in-law and daughters-in-law and eventually grandchildren. The house expanded with the family, rooms added as needed, until the small cabin Cole had built for his bride was just the heart of a much larger home. Julia's dress shop in town thrived, and she trained several younger women in the art of fine sewing, passing on the skills her mother had taught her so many years ago. Cole's hair went completely gray, then white, but his hands remained steady and his mind sharp. He was respected throughout the territory as an honest man and a skilled horseman. Young cowboys came to him for advice, and he gave it freely, along with stern lectures about treating women with respect and working hard. On their 25th anniversary, their children threw them a party that seemed to include half of Beaver. Julia wore a dress she had made herself from beautiful blue silk, and Cole wore a new suit their children had commissioned. They danced together in the town hall while their friends and family looked on, still moving together with the easy grace of long partnership. 25 years, Julia marveled as they swayed to the music. "Can you believe it? Best 25 years of my life," Cole said. "And I am looking forward to the next 25. You are an optimist," Julia teased. "We will be ancient by then." I do not care how old we get, as long as we are together." Cole's voice was serious despite the festive atmosphere around them. "You are still the most beautiful woman I have ever seen, Julia Jackson, and I love you more today than I did on our wedding day." "That is good," Julia said, tears pricking her eyes, "because I love you more too. Every day you give me new reasons to fall in love with you all over again." They kissed, and their children cheered, and the party continued late into the night. More years passed. Children grew and left home, though they remained close, visiting often and bringing grandchildren to spoil. The ranch prospered, and Julia's shop became an institution in Beaver. They weathered droughts and hard winters, celebrated good years, and mourned the losses that came with time. Eleanor passed peacefully in her sleep at the age of 87, and Julia grieved the woman who had been like a mother to her. Martha retired from teaching and spent her days writing letters and tending an elaborate garden. The town continued to grow, bringing new faces and new energy. Through it all, Cole and Julia remained the steadfast center of their family and community. Their love story had become legend in Beaver. The tale of the torn dress and the cowboy who sewed it by firelight, who saw a woman in need and offered help that became so much more. Young couples starting their own journeys would ask Julia for advice, and she always told them the same thing: build on a foundation of kindness and respect. Love will grow from there if you let it, and do not be afraid to accept help when it is offered honestly. Sometimes the greatest gifts come in the smallest acts of service. On their 50th anniversary, the whole town celebrated with them. They sat in places of honor at a grand party, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and accepted congratulations from friends old and new. Cole's hands shook now with age, and Julia's eyes were not as sharp as they once were. But when they looked at each other, they saw not the weathered exteriors but the young people they had been, falling in love by firelight and starlight in the Utah desert. 50 years, Cole said wonderingly. Half a century since the luckiest day of my life. The day we met. Julia asked, smiling. The day your dress tore, Cole corrected. That gave me the excuse to talk to you, to help you. Everything good in my life came from that moment. Julia took his gnarled hand in hers, threading their fingers together as they had done thousands of times before. Then I am grateful for that rusty nail, as much trouble as it caused. It brought me to you, and you gave me everything I never knew I needed. They kissed gently, mindful of their creaky bones and aged bodies, but the love behind it was as strong as ever. Their family applauded, and the party continued around them, but Cole and Julia were in their own world, lost in memories and gratitude. They spent the evening telling stories to their grandchildren about the old days, about wagon trains and settling the frontier, about building a life from nothing through hard work and determination and love. The children listened with wide eyes, asking questions and begging for more details. When the party finally ended and their family helped them back to their ranch house, Julia and Cole sat on their porch in the gathering darkness, watching stars emerge in the vast sky above. It has been a good life, Cole said quietly. Better than I ever dreamed possible. It has, Julia agreed. Full of love and joy and purpose, we built something beautiful, Cole, together. Together, he echoed, squeezing her hand. That is the key word. Everything we accomplished, we did as partners. I could never have done any of it without you, nor I without you. Julia leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him beside her. After 50 years, he was still her rock, her safe harbor, her home. They sat in peaceful silence as darkness fell completely and the stars blazed overhead in their desert sky. Inside the house, they could hear their children moving about, settling in for the night. The ranch was quiet except for the occasional sound of horses shifting in the barn and the distant call of a coyote. This was home. This was family. This was the life they had built from a torn dress and an act of kindness performed by Firelight. Julia thought about that scared young woman who had stood by the wagon with her dress in ruins, thinking her life was over before it had truly begun. She wished she could go back and tell that woman not to despair, that help was coming in the form of a quiet cowboy with skilled hands and a generous heart. She wished she could tell her that the worst moment of her journey would lead to the best years of her life. But perhaps that young woman already knew on some level. Perhaps that was why she had accepted Cole's help, why she had opened her heart to the possibility of love even when everything else seemed hopeless. "What are you thinking about?" Cole asked, as he had so many times over the years. "That torn dress," Julia said with a smile. "And the cowboy who sewed it for me while I slept, giving me back my dignity along with my modesty. I was thinking about how one small act of kindness can change everything." "It did change everything," Cole agreed. "That night, sitting by the fire making those stitches, I was already falling in love with you. Every stitch was a prayer that you would give me a chance, that you would see past the dust and the rough edges to the man underneath who just wanted to make you happy." "I saw that man," Julia said softly. "I see him still, every time I look at you. You have made me so happy, Cole Jackson, happier than I ever thought possible." "The feeling is entirely mutual, Mrs. Jackson." They sat together under the stars, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a love that had lasted a lifetime. The torn dress was long gone, turned into rags and then dust, but the stitches Cole had made that night by firelight remained metaphorically intact, binding their lives together as surely as any wedding vow. As they finally rose to go inside and sleep in the bed they had shared for 50 years, Julia sent up a silent prayer of gratitude for rusty nails and torn dresses, for kind cowboys and second chances, for all the unexpected turns that had led her to this moment, this life, this love. She had come to Beaver with nothing and found everything. And it had all begun with her only dress tearing on a wagon nail and a cowboy who cared enough to sew it by firelight while she slept. It was, she thought as she drifted off to sleep in Cole's arms, the perfect beginning to their perfect life together.